The world as everyone knew it ended on a night that began like any other. In the small, bustling city of Havenbrook, people hurried home from work, children played in the fading sunlight, and the air was filled with the comforting sounds of everyday life. But as darkness crept in, so did something else, something unnatural. It started with a strange news report, a mysterious illness spreading rapidly through the city's outskirts, causing fever, confusion, and violent behavior. Most dismissed it as another sensational story, but within hours the truth became impossible to ignore. Sirens wailed through the night as emergency vehicles raced down the streets, and the city's hospital overflowed with patients whose eyes glowed with a sickly, unnatural light. Among the chaos, a small group of survivors began to form, drawn together by fate and desperation. There was Dr. Lena Carter, a resourceful ER doctor who had seen the first victims up close and recognized the signs of something far worse than any disease she'd ever encountered. Alongside her was Marcus Reed, a former firefighter with a strong sense of duty and a haunted past, and Jamie Tran, a quick-thinking college student separated from her family in the confusion. As the city descended into panic, the group found themselves barricaded inside the hospital, listening in horror as the infected, now unmistakably zombies, roamed the halls, their groans echoing through the darkness. The survivors knew they couldn't stay there forever. Supplies were running low and the undead were relentless, pounding on doors and windows with inhuman strength. Dr. Carter, using her medical knowledge, tried to keep everyone calm and treated the wounded, but she knew that hope was slipping away with every passing hour. Marcus took charge of fortifying their defenses, using whatever he could find to block entrances and create makeshift weapons. Jamie, though terrified, proved invaluable, using her phone to track news updates and map out possible escape routes. As dawn approached, the group faced a terrible choice: stay and risk being overrun, or venture out into a city teeming with the undead in search of safety. The tension was palpable, every sound outside sending a jolt of fear through the survivors. They argued, weighed their options, and finally agreed that staying put meant certain death. With heavy hearts and trembling hands, they prepared to leave the relative safety of the hospital. As they crept through the darkened corridors, the true horror of their situation became clear. The hospital, once a place of healing, was now a labyrinth of death. Shadows flickered on the walls, and the groans of the undead grew louder with every step. The group moved silently, relying on Marcus's experience and Lena's steady leadership. Jamie clutched a flashlight, her knuckles white, as they navigated the maze of overturned gurneys and shattered glass. At every turn, danger lurked, zombies shuffling in the darkness, drawn by the faintest sound. The survivors' hearts pounded in their chests as they narrowly avoided detection, slipping past the undead with breathless precision. Finally, they reached the emergency exit, only to find it blocked by a horde of zombies, their eyes fixed hungrily on the living. Panic threatened to overwhelm them, but Marcus devised a risky plan: create a diversion to draw the zombies away, giving the others a chance to escape. With no time to lose, he set off a fire alarm, the shrill sound echoing through the building and sending the undead into a frenzy. As the zombies surged toward the noise, Lena, Jamie, and the others made their move, slipping out into the cold, uncertain dawn. The city outside was unrecognizable, cars abandoned in the streets, buildings smoldering, and the distant cries of survivors echoing through the chaos. The group paused only for a moment, catching their breath and steeling themselves for what lay ahead. They knew the fight for survival had only just begun, and that every decision from this point on could mean the difference between life and death. As they disappeared into the ruined city, the sun rose on a world forever changed. A world where the line between the living and the dead had been shattered, and where hope was a precious, fleeting thing. Stepping out of the hospital and into the ruined streets of Havenbrook, Lena, Marcus, Jamie, and the handful of other survivors felt the weight of the world pressing down on them. The city, once alive with the hum of daily life, was now eerily silent except for the distant, guttural moans of the undead. Smoke drifted from burning cars, and the air was thick with the acrid scent of destruction. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every alleyway a potential trap. The group moved cautiously, sticking close together as they navigated the debris-strewn streets. Marcus led the way, his firefighter instincts kicking in as he scanned for danger and safe passage. Lena kept a watchful eye on the others, especially Jamie, who was still shaken but determined to help however she could. Their first goal was clear: find shelter and supplies. The hospital had been a temporary haven, but out here they were exposed and vulnerable. As they made their way through the city, the group encountered signs of chaos everywhere: overturned buses, shattered storefronts, and hastily abandoned belongings. Occasionally they spotted other survivors in the distance, but fear and mistrust kept everyone apart. No one knew who could be trusted, and the threat of infection loomed over every interaction. The group ducked into a small convenience store, hoping to scavenge food and water. Inside, the shelves were mostly bare, but Jamie managed to find a few cans of soup and bottles of water. As they gathered supplies, a sudden crash from the back room sent their hearts racing. Marcus motioned for silence, and the group held their breath as the door creaked open. To their relief, it was not a zombie, but a frightened young boy, no older than 10, clutching a baseball bat. His name was Ethan, and he had been hiding since the outbreak began. After some gentle coaxing from Lena, Ethan agreed to join the group, his wide eyes filled with both fear and hope. With Ethan in tow, the group pressed on, their numbers, and their sense of responsibility, growing. As they moved deeper into the city, they realized that the undead were not the only danger. Fires raged unchecked, and the threat of collapsing buildings was ever present. At one point, they were forced to take shelter in an abandoned subway station as a massive horde of zombies passed overhead, their groans echoing through the tunnels. In the dim light, the survivors shared stories of loved ones lost and dreams shattered, forging a fragile bond that would be tested in the days to come. Lena, ever the leader, tried to keep spirits up, reminding everyone that as long as they stuck together, there was hope. But as night fell and the city grew even more dangerous, the group knew that survival would require more than just hope. It would take courage, quick thinking, and a willingness to make impossible choices. As they settled in for the night, barricading the subway entrance with whatever they could find, the group took turns keeping watch. The silence was broken only by the distant sounds of the undead and the occasional sob from Ethan, who clung to his bat like a lifeline. Jamie, unable to sleep, scrolled through her phone, searching for any sign of rescue or safe zones. The battery was nearly dead, but she managed to find a message from a nearby military outpost, promising shelter for any survivors who could make it there. The outpost was miles away on the other side of the city, but it was the first real glimmer of hope they'd had since the outbreak began. As dawn approached, the group prepared to move again, their resolve hardened by the night's trials. They knew the journey ahead would be perilous, but with a new destination in mind and a growing sense of unity, they were ready to face whatever horrors awaited them in the world outside. With the first rays of sunlight filtering through the grime-streaked subway entrance, Lena, Marcus, Jamie, Ethan, and the rest of the group emerged cautiously into the city above. The message Jamie had found about the military outpost became their beacon of hope, and every step they took was driven by the promise of safety. The streets were quieter now, but the silence was deceptive. Every corner could hide a lurking threat. Marcus took the lead, mapping a route that would keep them away from the main roads, where the undead seemed to gather in greater numbers. They moved through alleyways and backstreets, their senses sharpened by fear and necessity. Lena kept a close eye on Ethan, who struggled to keep up but refused to be left behind. The group's bond grew stronger with every shared glance and whispered word of encouragement. As they navigated the city, they encountered new challenges. At one intersection, they found themselves trapped between two advancing groups of zombies. Thinking quickly, Jamie spotted a fire escape leading up to an old apartment building. The group scrambled up the metal stairs, hearts pounding as the undead clawed at the rails below. Inside, the building was eerily quiet, the hallways littered with signs of hurried evacuation, abandoned suitcases, spilled groceries, and family photos left behind in the rush to escape. They moved from room to room searching for anything useful. In one apartment, Lena found a first aid kit and some canned food, while Marcus discovered a map of the city with several routes marked in red. It was a small victory, but it lifted their spirits. As they rested, a sudden noise from the floor above sent a chill through the group. Marcus and Lena crept upstairs to investigate, finding a lone survivor, a middle-aged woman named Ruth, who had barricaded herself in her apartment. Ruth was wary at first, but after seeing the group's determination and kindness, she agreed to join them. She brought valuable knowledge of the city's layout and warned them of a collapsed bridge that blocked the most direct route to the outpost. With Ruth's help, they plotted a new path, one that would take them through the city's industrial district, a place rumored to be crawling with the undead. The journey resumed, each member of the group carrying the weight of their own fears and hopes. As they moved through the industrial district, the air grew thick with smoke and the distant sound of machinery. The group had to cross a narrow catwalk above a factory floor teeming with zombies. One misstep could mean disaster. Jamie, her nerves steady, led the way, guiding Ethan and Ruth across while Marcus and Lena brought up the rear. Halfway across, a loose panel gave way beneath Marcus's foot, sending a loud clang echoing through the factory. The zombies below turned their heads, their groans rising in a chilling chorus. The group hurried across, barely making it to the other side before the undead began to swarm beneath them. Breathless and shaken, they pressed on, finally reaching the edge of the industrial district as dusk began to fall. The city's skyline was silhouetted against the setting sun, and for a moment the group allowed themselves to hope. They were closer to the outpost now, but the journey had taken its toll. Supplies were running low and exhaustion was setting in. As they found shelter in an abandoned office building for the night, Lena tended to their wounds and reminded them of how far they'd come. The group huddled together, sharing what little food they had left and making plans for the final leg of their journey. Outside, the city was alive with the restless dead, but inside, the survivors found a fragile sense of peace. They knew the hardest part was yet to come, but for now they clung to the hope that somewhere beyond the chaos, sanctuary awaited. Night in the abandoned office building was a test of nerves and endurance. The survivors took turns keeping watch, each hour stretching longer than the last as the sounds of the undead drifted up from the streets below. Lena sat quietly beside Ethan, offering him gentle reassurances as he drifted in and out of restless sleep. Marcus and Ruth pored over the city map, whispering about the best way to approach the military outpost without drawing attention. Jamie, her phone now completely dead, felt the weight of isolation more than ever, but she refused to let despair take hold. As dawn broke, the group gathered their meager supplies and prepared to move, knowing that every minute spent in one place increased their risk. The route Ruth had suggested would take them through a narrow stretch of parkland, a shortcut that could save precious time but also posed new dangers. The park, once a place of laughter and life, was now overgrown and eerily silent, the playgrounds and benches reclaimed by nature and shadow. The group moved cautiously, eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. Halfway through they heard a distant scream, a sharp, desperate cry that cut through the morning air. Against their better judgment, the group followed the sound, finding a young woman trapped atop a jungle gym, surrounded by a small group of zombies. Without hesitation, Marcus and Lena sprang into action. Marcus distracted the zombies, drawing them away with shouts and thrown debris, while Lena and Jamie helped the woman down. The rescue was quick but costly. In the chaos, Ruth twisted her ankle, slowing the group's pace. The rescued woman, who introduced herself as Priya, was shaken but grateful. She explained that she had been separated from her own group days earlier and had been surviving on her own ever since. Her knowledge of the area proved invaluable, as she warned the group of a large horde that had been seen moving toward the outpost's main entrance. With this new information, the survivors realized they would need to find an alternate way in, one that would require them to cross a dangerous stretch of open ground and scale a section of the outpost's perimeter fence. As they approached the final stretch, tension mounted. The open ground was littered with abandoned vehicles and the remains of failed escape attempts, a grim reminder of what was at stake. Moving as quickly and quietly as possible, the group made their way across, hearts pounding with every step. Suddenly, a car alarm blared to life, triggered by a stray footstep. The noise drew the attention of nearby zombies, who began to converge on their position. Marcus and Ruth, despite her injury, volunteered to hold off the undead while the others climbed the fence. It was a desperate gamble, but there was no time to argue. Lena, Jamie, Ethan, and Priya scrambled over the fence, hands raw and bleeding, while Marcus and Ruth fought to buy them precious seconds. Just as the undead closed in, Marcus managed to boost Ruth over the fence before climbing up himself, narrowly escaping the grasping hands below. On the other side, the group collapsed in exhaustion, but there was no time to rest. The outpost loomed ahead, its gates battered but still standing. Soldiers on the wall shouted warnings, demanding proof that the newcomers were not infected. Lena, using her medical expertise, quickly explained their situation and showed her hospital ID. After a tense moment, the gates creaked open, and the survivors were ushered inside. Relief washed over them, but it was tempered by the knowledge of what they had lost, and what they had risked to get here. Inside the outpost, the survivors found a fragile sense of safety, but also new challenges and questions. The world outside was still overrun, and the fight for survival was far from over. As night fell, the group huddled together, grateful for the shelter but haunted by the shadows of sacrifice that had brought them this far. Inside the military outpost, the survivors were greeted by a world that felt both foreign and familiar. The compound was a patchwork of tents, makeshift shelters and hastily constructed barricades, all under the watchful eyes of armed soldiers. The air buzzed with tension and the low hum of generators, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Lena, Marcus, Jamie, Ethan, Ruth, and Priya were quickly ushered through a decontamination checkpoint, where medics checked them for bites or signs of infection. The process was thorough and intimidating, but Lena's calm explanations and medical background helped ease the soldiers' suspicions. Once cleared, the group was given food, water, and a place to rest, luxuries they hadn't dared to hope for in days. As they settled in, the survivors began to learn the rules of life behind the walls. The outpost was run with strict discipline. Curfews were enforced, resources were rationed, and everyone was expected to contribute. Marcus volunteered to help reinforce the barricades, his experience as a firefighter making him a valuable asset. Lena was quickly recruited by the medical team, where she treated both the wounded and the weary, her skills in high demand. Jamie, ever resourceful, found work in the communications tent, helping to monitor radio signals for any signs of other survivors. Ruth, still nursing her injured ankle, assisted in the kitchen, while Priya and Ethan were assigned to help distribute supplies. Despite the relative safety, the outpost was far from a sanctuary. Tensions simmered beneath the surface as resources dwindled and fear of infection lingered. Some of the long-term residents eyed the newcomers with suspicion, worried that any mistake could bring disaster inside the walls. Rumors spread of a recent breach, and the memory of the horde outside was never far from anyone's mind. One evening, as the group gathered for a meager dinner, a heated argument broke out between two soldiers over how to handle a suspected infection. The confrontation ended with one soldier being quarantined, his fate uncertain. The incident left everyone on edge, a stark reminder that the threat was not just outside the walls, but within them as well. As days passed, the survivors began to notice strange occurrences: supplies going missing, secret meetings held late at night, and a growing sense of unrest among the outpost's leaders. Jamie overheard a conversation about a possible evacuation plan, but details were scarce. Lena, meanwhile, discovered that the medical team was running dangerously low on antibiotics and other essentials. The group realized that their safety was more fragile than it appeared, and that the outpost's leaders were hiding something. One night, Marcus was approached by a soldier named Alvarez, who confided that the outpost was not as secure as everyone believed. The fences were failing in places, and a massive horde was gathering just beyond the perimeter. Alvarez warned that if the leadership didn't act soon, the outpost could be overrun. Faced with this new threat, the group debated their options. Should they trust the outpost's leaders and hope for the best, or take matters into their own hands? The sense of unity that had carried them this far was tested as fear and uncertainty crept in. Lena argued for staying and helping to strengthen the defenses, while Marcus and Jamie pushed for finding a way out before it was too late. Ruth, Priya, and Ethan were torn, each haunted by memories of what they had already survived. As the night deepened, the group made a pact. Whatever happened, they would face it together. The world outside was still overrun by the undead, but inside the outpost, the true battle for survival was just beginning. The uneasy calm inside the outpost shattered just before dawn. A distant, thunderous roar echoed through the compound, followed by frantic shouts and the blaring of alarms. Soldiers rushed to the barricades as the survivors scrambled from their bunks, hearts pounding with dread. Marcus, already dressed and alert, sprinted to the outer wall, where he saw the nightmare Alvarez had warned about. A massive horde of zombies, drawn by the noise and lights, was pressing against the weakened sections of the fence. The barricades groaned under the relentless assault, and it was clear they wouldn't hold for long. Lena rushed to the medical tent, where chaos reigned. Wounded soldiers and terrified civilians crowded the space, and supplies were running dangerously low. She worked quickly, bandaging wounds and calming panicked patients, her mind racing with worry for her friends. Jamie, in the communications tent, tried desperately to reach other outposts for help, but the radio was filled with static and desperate pleas from other survivors. Ruth, Priya, and Ethan huddled together in the supply tent, helping distribute what little food and water remained to those in need. As the horde broke through the first barricade, panic swept through the outpost. Soldiers fired into the mass of undead, but their numbers seemed endless. Marcus found Alvarez and a small group of defenders trying to hold a critical section of the fence. He joined them, using his strength and quick thinking to reinforce the barricade with whatever materials they could find. But the undead kept coming, their sheer numbers overwhelming every defense. Inside the compound, Lena realized the medical tent was no longer safe. She quickly organized an evacuation, leading the wounded and her fellow medics toward a secondary shelter near the center of the outpost. Jamie, seeing the chaos unfold, grabbed Ethan and Priya, urging them to follow her to the rendezvous point the group had agreed on the night before. Ruth, limping but determined, helped guide frightened children and elderly survivors through the confusion. As the survivors regrouped, they faced a terrible choice: stay and risk being trapped by the horde, or attempt a dangerous escape through a maintenance tunnel Alvarez had mentioned. The tunnel, hidden beneath a storage shed, was rumored to lead beyond the outpost walls, but no one knew for sure if it was clear, or if it even still existed. With the undead closing in and the compound falling apart, the group made their decision. Marcus and Alvarez led the way, clearing a path through the chaos as Lena, Jamie, Ruth, Priya, and Ethan followed close behind. Reaching the storage shed, they found the entrance to the tunnel just as the undead began to pour into the compound. The group squeezed through the narrow opening, hearts pounding as they descended into darkness. Behind them, the sounds of gunfire and screams faded, replaced by the echoing drip of water and the distant moans of the undead. The tunnel was cramped and pitch black, but it offered a sliver of hope, a chance to escape the nightmare above. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, the group clung to each other, guided only by the faint beam of Jamie's flashlight. Every step was filled with uncertainty, but together they pressed on, determined to survive. Above ground, the outpost fell to the horde, but in the darkness below, the survivors found a new resolve. The world was still overrun and danger lurked around every corner, but as long as they had each other, hope remained alive. The maintenance tunnel was a world apart from the chaos above, a narrow, suffocating passage that seemed to stretch on forever. The group moved in single file, the only light coming from Jamie's flickering flashlight and the occasional glow of a phone screen. The air was thick with dust and the scent of damp earth, and every sound, every drip of water, every scuffle of a shoe, echoed ominously through the darkness. Lena led the way, her medical bag slung over her shoulder, while Marcus and Alvarez brought up the rear, weapons ready for anything that might emerge from the shadows. Ethan clung to Priya's hand, his small voice barely a whisper as he asked if they were going to make it out alive. Priya squeezed his hand, offering a quiet promise that they would. As they pressed deeper, the tunnel forked in several directions, each path marked only by faded maintenance signs. Ruth, limping but determined, used her knowledge of city infrastructure to help guide them, recalling stories her late husband had told her about the old utility lines beneath Havenbrook. The group chose the leftmost tunnel, hoping it would lead them away from the outpost and toward the city's outskirts. The journey was slow and tense. At one point they heard a distant scraping sound behind them. Something or someone was following. Marcus signaled for silence, and the group pressed themselves against the damp walls, hearts pounding. The sound faded, but the fear lingered, a reminder that they were never truly safe. After what felt like hours, the tunnel began to slope upward, and a faint breeze hinted at an exit ahead. Relief surged through the group, but it was short-lived. As they neared the end of the tunnel, they found the way blocked by a heavy metal grate, rusted but still sturdy. Panic threatened to set in, but Marcus and Alvarez worked together, using a crowbar and sheer determination to pry the grate loose. The noise echoed through the tunnel and soon the scraping sound returned, closer this time. Jamie shone her flashlight back down the tunnel, catching a glimpse of a lone zombie, its eyes reflecting the light as it shambled toward them. The group hurried, adrenaline fueling their efforts, and with a final heave the grate gave way. They scrambled out into the open air, emerging in a wooded area on the edge of the city. The sun was rising, casting golden light over the trees and giving the world a momentary sense of peace. The group collapsed in exhaustion, breathing in the fresh air and savoring their narrow escape. But the moment was fleeting. In the distance, the city still smoldered, and the moans of the undead drifted on the wind. The survivors knew they couldn't stay in one place for long. They took stock of their supplies, what little they had left, and made a plan to head for the hills beyond Havenbrook, where rumors spoke of a small, self-sustaining community that had managed to keep the undead at bay. As they set off through the woods, the group felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had survived the fall of the outpost, escaped the tunnels, and found each other in the darkness. The world was still dangerous and the future uncertain, but together they had become more than just survivors. They were a family bound by hope and the unbreakable will to live. With every step, they moved closer to a new beginning, determined to make their last stand for survival count. The survivors moved quietly through the forest, the early morning sun filtering through the trees and painting the world in soft gold. Every step away from the city felt like a small victory, but the group remained alert, knowing the undead could appear at any moment. Lena led the way, her eyes scanning the path ahead, while Marcus and Alvarez kept watch at the rear. Jamie, Ruth, Priya, and Ethan stayed close together, their bond stronger than ever after all they had endured. The woods were eerily peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos they had left behind, and for the first time in days the group allowed themselves to hope. As they climbed a gentle hill, the trees parted to reveal a small valley below. There, nestled among the greenery, was a cluster of sturdy cabins surrounded by a high wooden fence. Smoke curled from a chimney, and the faint sound of voices drifted on the breeze. The sight filled the group with cautious optimism. Could this be the rumored safe haven they had heard about? They approached slowly, hands raised in peace, and were soon met by a group of wary but well-armed residents. After a tense exchange, Lena explained their journey and the losses they had suffered. The leader of the community, a kind but cautious woman named Miriam, listened carefully before nodding and inviting them inside. Inside the fence, the survivors found a world that felt almost normal. Gardens flourished, children played, and people worked together to keep the community running. The newcomers were given food, water, and a place to rest. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan laughed as he played with other children, and Ruth wept tears of relief as she tended a small herb garden. Marcus and Alvarez helped reinforce the community's defenses, sharing what they had learned from the outpost. Jamie used her tech skills to help set up a better communication system, while Lena joined the small medical team, grateful to use her skills for healing rather than just survival. But even in this sanctuary, the scars of the past lingered. At night, the group gathered around a fire, sharing stories of those they had lost and the horrors they had witnessed. They knew the world outside was still dangerous, and that the undead could return at any time. Yet, in the faces of their new friends and the warmth of the fire, they found hope. Miriam spoke of plans to expand the community, to reach out to other survivors, and to rebuild what had been lost. The group realized that survival was no longer just about running or hiding, it was about reclaiming their humanity and building a future. As dawn broke over the valley, Lena looked around at her friends, her family, and felt a quiet sense of peace. They had faced the worst the world could offer and had not only survived but found a place to belong. The fight was not over, but for the first time, it felt winnable. Together, they would stand against the darkness, determined to protect their new home and each other. In a world overrun by the undead, the last stand for survival was not just about fighting zombies, it was about holding on to hope, and to each other no matter what the future held.